What if I told you that more than 120 members of Congress are openly calling for a sitting president to step down, and he's refusing? Not impeachment, not a warning, a direct demand to walk away from power. Emergency meetings, closed-door chaos, and a political firestorm that Washington hasn't seen in decades. This isn't rumor or social media noise. This is happening right now, and it's shaking the foundation of American politics. Behind the scenes, lawmakers are panicking, party leaders are losing control, and trust inside the government is collapsing fast. Some are calling it a constitutional pressure cooker. Others say it's the beginning of a historic downfall. The question isn't just what happened, it's how far this can go, and what happens if no one backs down. So stay with me until the end, because once you understand the 10 reasons Congress is exploding and why this moment is so dangerous, you'll realize this isn't just politics, it's a turning point. If this breakdown made you stop and think, drop a comment below. Your perspective matters, and we actually read them all. We put serious time and effort into making these videos clear, honest, and powerful. So if you value that, subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps more than you think. And if you want to stay ahead of stories before they explode, hit like and stay with us. What makes this moment truly explosive is not just anger. It's who the anger is coming from. In the United States Congress, lawmakers disagree on almost everything, but they usually close ranks when it comes to protecting their own party. That's why a bipartisan revolt is such a rare and dangerous signal. When members from both sides of the aisle start calling for a president to step down, it means the situation has moved far beyond normal political drama. This isn't about ideology anymore. It's about institutional survival. Here's why that matters. Parties are built on loyalty, discipline, and shared interest. When those bonds start breaking, it tells us that lawmakers believe staying silent is more dangerous than speaking out. For many of them, supporting Donald Trump now carries more political risk than opposing him. That calculation doesn't happen overnight. It happens when confidence collapses behind closed doors, when private warnings turn into public statements, and whispers turn into votes and resolutions. That's when leadership realizes control is slipping fast. And this kind of revolt creates a domino effect. Once a few lawmakers break ranks, others feel permission to follow. Suddenly, what was once unthinkable becomes normalized. Party leaders struggle to contain the fallout. Voters sense instability, and the media shifts from speculation to countdown mode. History shows us that bipartisan breaks are often the beginning of the end, not the middle of the story. When unity cracks at the top, everything below it starts to shake, and that's exactly why this first reason is the most dangerous one of all. If this explanation made something click for you, tell us in the comments. What do you think finally causes loyalty to break in politics? We put real time and research into breaking these stories down clearly. So if you appreciate that effort, subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us keep going. And stay with us, because the next reason explains why this revolt is spreading faster than anyone expected. When Congress calls an emergency session, that's not political theater. It's a warning signal. The United States Congress does not upend schedules, clear calendars, and pull lawmakers into urgent meetings unless something is seriously wrong. These sessions are reserved for moments when leaders believe delay could make the situation worse, not better. In simple terms, it means the normal pace of government can no longer handle the pressure to building behind the scenes. Emergency sessions usually happen when three things collide at once: time sensitivity, political risk, and loss of control. Lawmakers aren't just reacting to headlines. They're reacting to internal briefings, legal timelines, and political fallout that most of the public never sees when those private discussions suddenly move into public action. It tells us leadership believes the situation is reaching a point of no return. That's why this matters more than angry speeches or viral clips. This is the system itself trying to stabilize before something breaks. What makes this moment even more dangerous is who the emergency is centered around. When the pressure points directly at the president, especially someone as polarizing as Donald Trump, every decision becomes amplified. Markets watch, allies watch, voters watch, and lawmakers know that if they miscalculate, history will remember who acted and who froze. Emergency sessions are often the last attempt to regain order before events start controlling the politicians, instead of the other way around. Once that happens, outcomes become unpredictable, fast, and irreversible. If this made you see emergency sessions differently, drop a comment. What do you think lawmakers know that the public doesn't yet? We put real effort into explaining the why behind the headlines. So if that matters to you, subscribe. It's just one click, but it keeps this channel alive. Stay with us, because the next reason explains why this pressure is accelerating instead of slowing down. At the core of this crisis is a fear that goes beyond party politics, executive overreach. That term might sound abstract, but the idea is simple. When a president is seen as pushing past limits, ignoring norms, or testing the boundaries of power, Congress starts to panic. The United States Congress exists for one reason above all else: to act as a check on the executive branch. When lawmakers believe that balance is slipping, alarms go off fast, because once power concentrates too much at the top, it's incredibly hard to pull back. This is where things shift from political disagreement to institutional fear. Congress can tolerate controversial policies, harsh rhetoric, even constant gridlock. What it struggles to tolerate is the sense that rules no longer apply equally, or that authority is being used in ways that weaken oversight itself. When concerns about overreach surface, lawmakers don't just worry about today's headlines. They worry about the precedent being set. If one president can stretch the limits without consequence, what stops the next one from going further? That's the question quietly driving this revolt. And this is why pressure on Donald Trump has escalated so quickly. Allegations, whether proven or not, can still paralyze governance if enough lawmakers believe the system is being strained. Congress isn't acting because it's confident. It's acting because it's afraid of losing control altogether. History shows that moments like this don't start with collapse. They start with tension, denial, and delayed action. When leaders finally move, it's often because they believe waiting any longer could cause permanent damage to the balance of power itself. If this raised a red flag for you, let us know in the comments. Where do you think the line of presidential power should be drawn? We put serious effort into breaking these moments down clearly and honestly. So if you value that, subscribe. It's just one click, but it makes a real difference. Stick with us, because the next reason explains why public trust is collapsing at the worst possible time. What truly turns a political conflict into a full-blown crisis is public trust. And right now, that trust is eroding fast. Governments can survive bad policies, slow responses, even internal fighting, but they struggle to function when people stop believing the system is working for them. Inside the United States Congress, lawmakers are acutely aware of this. They track public sentiment closely, because once trust collapses, every decision they make is viewed through a lens of suspicion. At that point, even routine actions start to look illegitimate. This loss of trust creates a dangerous feedback loop. As skepticism grows, citizens disengage or grow angrier. Media scrutiny intensifies, and political opponents amplify every mistake. Lawmakers then feel pressure to act faster and louder, not necessarily because they have perfect answers, but because inaction looks like guilt or weakness. When confidence in leadership drops, silence becomes politically fatal. That's why you're seeing stronger language, emergency measures, and open calls for resignation instead of quiet negotiations behind closed doors. For a president as polarizing as Donald Trump, this collapse of trust is especially dangerous. His leadership style depends heavily on loyalty and belief. Once those begin to fracture, control becomes harder to maintain. Congress understands that restoring public confidence becomes nearly impossible while uncertainty hangs over the presidency. At some point, lawmakers stop asking whether a leader is technically still in power and start asking whether the country believes he should be. History shows that once public trust drops below a certain threshold, political outcomes stop being managed and start being forced by momentum. Be honest, do you think public trust is already broken, or can it still be repaired? Drop your take in the comments. We put a lot of effort into explaining the real forces behind these headlines. So if that matters to you, subscribe. It's just one click, but it truly helps. Stay with us because the next reason explains why timing makes this situation far more dangerous than it looks. Timing is everything in politics, and this crisis could not be happening at a worst possible moment. With midterm elections approaching, members of the United States Congress are no longer thinking in abstract terms about loyalty or ideology. They're thinking about survival. History shows that the president's party almost always takes losses in the midterms, even in calm times, when controversy, scandal, or instability enters the picture. Those losses can turn into a political wipeout. Lawmakers know this, and fear spreads quickly when the calendar starts working against them. This is where quiet concern turns into public action. As campaigns ramp up, every vote, every statement, and every association becomes ammunition for opponents. Members in competitive districts understand that defending a deeply controversial president can cost them their seats, that SY pressure accelerates. Instead of slowing down as elections get closer, what might have been tolerated early in a term becomes unacceptable when voters are about to make a decision. At that point, distance becomes strategy, and calls for resignation become a form of political self-defense. For Donald Trump, this timing problem is severe. His presence dominates headlines, rallies, and debates, leaving little room for lawmakers to change the subject. Congress isn't just reacting to events, it's reacting to voter psychology. When uncertainty hangs over leadership close to an election, fear replaces patience. And fear drives bold, sometimes desperate moves. This is why the situation feels like it's speeding up. The clock isn't just ticking, it's cornering everyone involved, forcing decisions that might not have happened under different timing. Midterms change everything. So tell us in the comments, should elections influence decisions this big? Or should politics pause for principle? We put serious thought and effort into breaking these moments down clearly. So if you value that, subscribe. It's just one click, but it keeps this work going. Don't go anywhere, because the next reason explains why legal pressure can paralyze leadership even without a final verdict. One of the most misunderstood forces in politics is legal pressure without resolution. A president does not need to be convicted or even charged for governance to grind to a halt. And inside the United States Congress, lawmakers understand this reality well. Ongoing investigations, unresolved allegations, and ethical questions create a cloud that affects everything. Negotiations stall, allies hesitate, and every policy debate gets drowned out by controversy. Even if nothing is proven yet, the weight of uncertainty alone can be enough to destabilize leadership. This is where politics diverges from the courtroom. Legal systems move slowly. Politics does not have that luxury. Congress operates on perception, timing, and public confidence. And when ethical questions dominate the conversation, Lawmakers start asking a different kind of question, not is this proven, but can the government function like this? Every delay looks like avoidance. Every defense sounds partisan, and every new headline reinforces the idea that leadership is distracted or compromised. At that point, governing becomes reactive instead of deliberate, and paralysis sets in. For Donald Trump, this kind of pressure is especially corrosive. His leadership style thrives on momentum, dominance, and constant counterattacks. But legal and ethical scrutiny drains energy from allies and shifts focus away from policy entirely. Congress knows that as long as these questions remain unresolved, nothing else can move forward cleanly. Not legislation, not negotiations, not unity. That's why calls for resignation often emerge before legal outcomes are decided. In moments like this, lawmakers aren't waiting for a verdict. They're trying to stop the system from freezing completely. Here's the real question. Should political leadership pause while legal questions play out, or is that already too risky? Tell us what you think in the comments. We put real effort into unpacking the forces behind these moments. So if that clarity matters to you, subscribe. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference. Stay with us because the next reason reveals why party leadership is losing control faster than anyone expected. Political parties rely on one critical thing to survive moments of crisis: control from the top. Leadership's job is to unify messaging, contain damage, and keep members in line. But right now, that control is slipping. Inside the United States Congress, party leaders are facing open defiance, mixed signals, and public disagreements that would normally be handled quietly behind closed doors. When leadership can no longer coordinate a clear response, the entire system starts to wobble. This loss of control creates confusion, and confusion breeds fear. Lawmakers don't know which message will protect them, which position will age well, or who will still be standing months from now. As a result, everyone starts freelancing. Some distance themselves. Others speak out early to avoid being lumped in later. And once that happens, unity collapses fast. Leadership can't punish everyone. They cannot silence everyone, and they certainly cannot pretend everything is fine when fractures are visible to the public. That's when internal disagreements turn into public power struggles. For Donald Trump, this is especially dangerous. His political strength has always depended on commanding loyalty and when enforcing discipline through influence and pressure. But when party leaders hesitate, or worse, contradict him, that authority weakens. Once lawmakers sense that leadership won't or can't protect them anymore, self-preservation takes over. History shows that when party leadership loses control during a presidential crisis, events move quickly and often unpredictably. At that stage, it's no longer about strategy. It's about containment. And containment usually comes too late. Let us know what you think. When party leaders lose control, should lawmakers fall in line or break away? Drop your take in the comments. We put real effort into explaining what's happening beneath the surface. So if that matters to you, subscribe. It's just one click, but it helps us keep doing this. Stay tuned, because the next reason explains why the world outside the U.S. is watching this more closely than you might think. What happens inside Washington never stays inside Washington. When instability surrounds the presidency, the rest of the world pays close attention inside the United States Congress. Lawmakers understand that this crisis isn't just about domestic politics, it's about credibility on the global stage. Allies, rivals, financial markets, and foreign governments all read political turmoil as a signal. And when that signal looks chaotic, it invites uncertainty far beyond U.S. borders. Here's why this matters so much. America's power relies heavily on perception. Perception of stability, leadership, and predictability. When Congress openly clashes with the president, emergency sessions are called, and resignation demands dominate headlines, foreign governments begin to recalculate. Allies may hesitate to commit to long-term agreements. Rivals may test boundaries, sensing distraction or weakness. Even global markets react to uncertainty at the top because leadership crises raise questions about future policy, enforcement, and consistency. Congress knows that prolonged instability can quietly erode influence without a single shot being fired. For Donald Trump, this international dimension adds even more pressure. His presidency has always drawn intense global attention, supporters and critics alike, watching every move. When domestic legitimacy is questioned, that scrutiny intensifies. Congress isn't just worried about headlines at home, it's worried about how this moment will be interpreted abroad. History shows that when internal political fights spill into the global arena, and the damage can outlast the crisis itself. That's why lawmakers often act faster once they realize the world is watching, not because they want to, but because they feel they have to. Think about this. Should global perception influence domestic political decisions? Drop your answer in the comments and let's talk about it. We put serious effort into connecting the dots others miss. So if that insight helps you, subscribe. It's just one click, but it means everything. Don't stop here, because the next reason explains why momentum, not legality, often decides how these crises end. At a certain point in political crises, momentum becomes more powerful than law, logic, or even intent. Inside the United States Congress, lawmakers understand this better than anyone. Once events start moving quickly, emergency sessions, public statements, resignations being discussed, the process gains a life of its own. Even people who might privately want to slow things down find themselves pulled forward by the pace of events. That's when control quietly shifts from leaders to the moment itself. Momentum is dangerous because it feeds on perception. Each new action signals that something serious is happening, which encourages the next action. And then the next silence starts to look like complicity. Caution starts to look like fear, and restraint starts to look like weakness. Lawmakers don't want to be remembered as the ones who hesitated while history was being written, so they move, not always because they're certain, but because standing still feels riskier than acting. That's how pressure compounds and decisions accelerate faster than anyone originally intended. For Donald Trump, momentum is especially threatening. His political strategy has often relied on dominating the narrative and overwhelming opponents with force and speed. But when momentum turns against a leader, those same tactics lose effectiveness. Congress recognizes that once the story becomes resignation instead of defense, reversing course is incredibly difficult. History shows that very few political figures survive once momentum swings this hard. At that stage, outcomes are shaped less by facts on paper and more by the unstoppable force of events unfolding in real time. Momentum changes everything. So tell us in the comments, do you think this situation has already passed the point of no return? We put real time and effort into explaining how these moments actually unfold. So if you value that insight, subscribe. It's just one click, but it truly helps. Stay with us, because the final reason explains why this could define an entire political legacy. Every presidency is ultimately remembered not just for policies, but for how it ends. Inside the United States Congress, lawmakers are acutely aware that this crisis isn't just about the present. It's about history. Moments like this become shorthand in textbooks, documentaries, and public memory. Fair or not, the final chapters often outweigh everything that came before them. That's why pressure intensifies when leaders approach a legacy-defining crossroads. What makes this especially powerful is that legacies are shaped by responses, not accusations. History tends to ask simple questions. Did the leaders stabilize the country or deepen the divide? Did they de-escalate or double down? Once those narratives take hold, they are nearly impossible to reverse. Congress understands that allowing a crisis to drag on doesn't freeze history. It actively writes it in real time. Each refusal, each escalation, each emergency session adds another line to that permanent record. For Donald Trump, the stakes could not be higher. His presidency has always been polarizing, emotional, and unprecedented. That means the ending matters even more than usual. Congress isn't just reacting to immediate pressure, they reacting to how this moment will be remembered decades from now. History rarely rewards prolonged standoffs. It remembers turning points. And lawmakers know that whether this ends in resignation, escalation, or collapse, this chapter will likely define how the entire presidency is judged long after the noise fades. This is about legacy. So tell us in the comments, how do you think history will remember this moment? We put serious thought and effort into breaking these stories down with clarity and context. So if you value that, subscribe. It's just one click, but it truly supports the channel. And if you want to understand these moments before they become history, stay right here with us.